Welcome to Crossroads and Cauldrons. We are two witches with jobs, families, and busy lives just like you. We talk about weaving the web of community, practicing magic, and life in the Deep South. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. You're listening to Crossroads and Cauldrons podcast, and I am Selena, and I have an exciting guest for you today. I met Storm Faerywolf is our guest, and I met him at Temple Fest a few years ago, and I was so taken by his presence in ritual. We did a ritual with Malik Taos, I believe, and I was just blown away by that experience. So I am super excited to have him on the show today. And he is a published author, a teacher, a poet, professional warlock. He's a contributor to the Modern Witch podcast and a journalist for The Wild Hunt. He's also a founding teacher of Black Rose, which is an online school of modern folk witchcraft. And he has several books coming out. Betwixt and Between was my first introduction to him, but he has Forbidden Mysteries of Faery Witchcraft and newly released The Witch's Name, and coming up later in this next month, actually, but it may be out by the time this show comes out, this Seders Kiss. So we're going to talk to Storm now. Welcome, Storm. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
I am thrilled to have you here. I just love this, but I'm going to show it if the camera won't be too shiny. But there it is, The Witch's Name. First of all, it's beautiful. Okay. Second,
thank you. I can't take credit for that, but thank you. I'm very excited with all the hard work they put into it.
It really does look fantastic. So I am okay. I have kind of my experience with magical names is early on. I really, really wanted one, and so I tried, some different ones, and then later I went through a phase where I was like, "This is silly and ridiculous," and then the deities that I work with, Hecate in particular, loves to sort of smack me down a notch whenever I need that, which is frequent. So during my third degree initiation, which is a shadow initiation, I was bestowed a name, gently, of course, and that is where Selena came from. And, pushed to use that. And I had to sort of push through a lot of personal feelings of really what it boiled down to was taking ownership of myself as a priestess, myself as a magical person and a powerful person. And that's really, it was fear that really kept me in that place of thinking, oh, this is silly, So I am a person who needs that shove. And I wish I had this book during that moment of being shoved, because I think it would have put everything in perspective for me. So I'm really excited that this book exists. I've never seen one totally dedicated to naming and crafting your magical persona. Please tell us all about it. What made you write this book? Was it just for me? Probably.
The real reason why I wrote this book is because somebody was mean to me on the internet.
That happens so much. I love your name.
and I'm kind of used to that because, first of all, not all magical, not everyone's magical. Right. And so like, just, Joe Schmo, out in the world, here's a name like Storm Faerywolf. And he's like, what the heck is this? This is weird. And I understand that. I knew that going in. My eyes were totally open. It wasn't like I was trying to blend in, by choosing a name like that, let alone using it publicly. What did he think he was in for? But it was just, I don't know. I would hear people snarky little things like, oh, I can't take him seriously, or, his name is totally cringe and, whatever. And I get that. It used to bother me. But then I guess just this one day, somebody said something. I had written an article, and somebody had said that they couldn't even read the article because of my name. And I thought, well, that is the stupidest thing I have ever heard. Like, I refuse to be exposed to new information because I find one aspect about the person to be off-putting. even though it has nothing to do with behavior or morals or, you know, human rights. You know, it just has to do with, I don't understand what this is. It seems weird. So it just rubbed me the wrong way one day. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to tell my story. Because, you know, people in my own life, you know, who had heard my name, and I was able to explain to them, like, yes, it came from these dreams and it was this long process. And here's this big period of time in which I rejected it because I didn't feel like I could take ownership of it. So when you were talking about that, it was like, oh my God, that was exactly my experience. Was I didn't feel like I could take ownership of this. You know, like it seemed too powerful. Like the wolf in particular, it seemed too powerful for me. Now, it showed up in my life ever since I was a little kid. You know, looking back, you know, hindsight's 2020. I can look back and be like, oh my God, I had all these experiences with wolf and it was showing up. But it wasn't until I was 19 and I was homeless, you know, with a friend of mine, to the degree where sometimes we were couch surfing with friends, but most of the time we were like homeless. Like I slept on the concrete behind a grocery store, right? I slept at a bus stop, in a field, you know, that kind of stuff, right? We'd stay up all night at a diner because it was too cold to sleep at night outside and it wasn't safe. You know, there's a whole other crowd of people at night, you know, when everyone is safe and snug in bed, right? In their suburban homes, you know. So, but during this time, I had a particularly low time, you know, one evening, and I had a vision of a being that I call Mother Wolf. And it was silent, but it was just filled with this psychic knowing where I just knew that this was temporary. You know, the station that I had found myself in was temporary. And she was somehow reminding me to focus on what was important, which was my spirit, you know, and that I needed to focus on my magic, my craft, you know. And so I just had a little bit of, you know, time with this spirit, Mother Wolf, and then it faded. And I just felt like I felt a little bit better, you know, about myself. I could get through. But then, of course, I shelved it, as most humans do. You know, it's like you have this profound experience, right? And then we're like, oh, what's on TV? Or, you know, what's next? Or, you know, I have to pay these bills. And then you forget all about it. It's like, wait, that was a hugely transformative experience, right? Because it was powerful. And but then I just kind of went off and did my other stuff. And so later it was with some other dreams. I had another dream in which I was a wolf running up this mountain. And I remember it felt really weird. And I looked down and I could see my paws, you know, and I'm running. And I get up to the top of the mountain and I howl at the moon, kind of stereotypically, I would think. And when I woke up, I felt like I was buzzing. And then the storm part of my name came from a series of dreams that actually related to recurring dreams I had as a child. And I talk about that, of course, in the book as well. But the big part of the dream was there was a tornado and I was terrified of it. But I had a magic ring and I was hoping it was going to like protect us all, you know, from this thing. And I couldn't get it to work. I couldn't get my magic to work. I didn't know how to do it. Eventually the tornado picks me up and I think, oh, that's it. I'm dead. I was terrified. It was a nightmare, totally terrified. And then I just let go. I was like, okay, there's nothing I can do. Don't struggle. Just let go. And as soon as I let go, all of the wind and the rain and the lightning and the hail and, you know, just went inside of my body. And I was just gently let down onto the ground and everything was clear and quiet. And then I woke up and I felt buzzy and I thought, this is it. It just felt right. And so I took Storm as the first part of my name and Wolf as the last part. So I was Storm Wolf, you know, for a good chunk. And then later, when I was deep in my studies in the Anderson fairy tradition, I took on fairy as part of my name too. And it just stuck. As soon as I put it together, Storm Faerywolf, there was something that was just like hitting a musical note. You know, it was just like, oh, this tone, this energy, it felt right. There was a resonance to it. And I couldn't explain it. And probably because I couldn't really explain it, I recognized the power in it. And so I decided, hey, this is just going to be my public magical name, you know, and I talk in the book about there's different types of magical names. You might have more than one. They might change over the years, depending on what you're going through. But Storm Faerywolf is my public magical name. It is my real name in the sense it is the name that I use every day. It's the name I use at the grocery store. It's the name that I have on my mail, that comes to my house, so it is my real name. It's not necessarily my legal name, although I did change my legal name to be more in accordance, I will say, with my magical name. So there's some elements there that are the same. There's some elements that are different. But I don't consider my legal name or my birth name to be my real name. So that's another distinction. That's another reason why I wanted to write this book, is because that was a question I would get all the time. In fact, you can, at least when I go and I Google stuff, I will Google like my name to see like who's talking about me and what reviews and whatever. Cause I'm always trying to figure out how's my
terrible idea.
It kind of is, but it's going okay right now. I'm going to knock on wood.
Yeah, there we go. Find some.
But one of the things, how Google will predict, it'll show you what other people are searching for, right? That are related. Oh. And so when I look up like Faerywolf, I will see down at the bottom in the suggestions, Storm Faerywolf, real name.
Oh.
So people are trying to Google my real name.
But they know your real name. Your real name is Storm Faerywolf.
There you go. Exactly. It was like, you already got it. So it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I wrote the book because someone was snarky to me. And I thought, here you go. And usually when somebody kind of pokes me, I try to turn it into a creative project, because I want that to be kind of my reaction, is when I get negativity thrown at me, I want to turn it into something positive. And so there you go. And so far, I'm getting good positive feedback from people. People seem to like the book. I'm very grateful. It just came out March 8th, so it's still new, but so far so good. I'm just gonna again knock on some wood here.
There you go. No,
and hope for the best.
I love it, and I love your story of receiving the name Storm. That's such a powerful metaphor, which obviously I'm sure you see, but to tame that fear that you had and to accept your power, not to be afraid of your own power, is when you kind of surrender to it and you gain a measure of control over it just in that moment. So that's such an initiatory experience, just having that vision, and then to label yourself, okay, this is who I am. That's an incredibly powerful thing. And I don't think people recognize that. I don't think people recognize the difficulty in taking on a new name. And once you do, you have to sort of fight for it, which I struggled with for a while. But like I said, my guides are very, very quick to kick me in the pants if needed, often. But telling people, oh no, this is my name, especially if they've known you by a different name for a long time,
right?
And people who are your teachers and people who were your mentors, and you have to look at them and say, very well, that is not my name. This is who I am. And, it's diminishing to me when you call me by a different name, So what is your experience with that? Because I think a lot of people struggle there and stop there. I have students who choose a magical name and then they don't ever want to use it. And I'm like, would you like me to call you by this name? And they're like, no. Okay. But they do. But they do.
Right. That's
but they
an
don't
interesting
correct people.
That's an interesting thing for me, because I've certainly run into that, where people are like, oh, well, you could call me this, you could call me that, you could call me this, right? They've got like all these different names, they have nicknames. Yeah. Well, what do you prefer? I will say, oh, I don't mind. They will respond back. And my thought is, you absolutely do mind. And if you don't mind, you really should, because this is who you are. You are making a statement about yourself. You're making a statement about your boundaries, about the type of energy you want to put out into the world, the type of energy that you are willing to receive from others. And all of that is encoded in your name, to some degree, and so it gives us a point of focus, between so we can actually communicate with each other, and it's such an important thing. It's part of claiming your own power. I feel that if you don't care what somebody calls you, then to some degree, you don't actually care how they treat you either. So I'd be fascinated to look at, I don't know if there were like any studies, obviously I don't think there would be any studies on this, yet. We need like some more magical universities out there, research universities. But people who really have poor self-esteem and poor boundaries, I would think would probably be more likely to say, oh, it doesn't matter what you call me.
Yes.
Because that's how it always strikes me, that's just like, oh, it's a little wishy-washy. It's a little codependent. It's
Yeah.
also putting the responsibility on somebody else. I'm not going to tell you what I like, but let me tell you, I will have a response if I don't like it. And whether or
Right.
not the person takes responsibility for that is a whole other conversation.
Mhm.
But I think it's totally important in order to, for us to claim our own name, and I actually think it's important for a lot of us, maybe more of us, to actually claim a name other than the one we were assigned at birth, because I found it to be such an incredible act of power. I was no longer just an innocent bystander,
Mhm.
in my own life. In my situation, I was named after my father mostly. We had different middle names, same initial, and same with my grandfather. So it was kind of like this. Oh, it's almost like this little mini tradition that was starting.
That's so
And
funny. My son is at the bottom of that same type of tree. But I could only get away with changing his middle name. I had to keep the initials. It was a situation. It was
right,
fine.
that was a thing. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
I was the firstborn. I'm the oldest, and so there's their whole firstborn son thing.
Hmm.
And that was just not me. Growing up,
Yeah.
I knew that wasn't my name. I felt like that name was on loan.
Mhm.
And I know that a lot of kids fantasize about having another name,
Hmm.
and so I'm not saying, oh, I was unique in this. However, feeling that that wasn't my name isn't something that went away, that just continued, and so I was fortunate enough to where that particular birth name had a few different possible nicknames and
Hmm.
attached to it. So I was basically raised with one diminutive form of that name. And then later, when I moved out and was at school, I was able to choose a different diminutive nickname, from that name
Yeah.
in order to kind of claim my own identity. But then even that wasn't enough,
Hmm.
and so and then of course then these experiences that I talk about, and I was like, oh, this is what I'm actually supposed to do, because I knew that my role, my calling
Hmm.
in life has been to be a public resource for witchcraft. And that has been from an early age. I first saw Lori Cabot, the official witch of Salem, on my television when I was a little boy. She was running for mayor of Salem, and she was in her black flowy robes, and she has her staff and her hair teased out to there and everything, and her black eyeliner. And I was just like, yeah, that is so cool,
Yeah.
because she's living what she wants to live. I know some other people look at her and be like, oh, she's just trying to get attention, or she's just trying to do this, she's just trying to do that. Because everybody always judges other people when they're
Hmm.
doing something different. If you're not just
Yes.
in the cis white heterosexual paradigm, then you're going to be looked at suspect. And so I saw her doing this full of bravery.
Hmm.
She didn't care that people were going to label her weird or absurd. She knew that she was weird. And maybe some
Hmm.
part of her knew it is absurd. On one level, witchcraft is absurd. I'm
Hmm.
not saying that it's bad, it's awesome, but come on. Part of it is ridiculous. A bunch of grown ass adults getting naked in their living room and dancing around like a burning cauldron. You know, it's crazy on one level, but it's powerful. And
Hmm.
that's something that in my experience of the craft, I always felt that we have to kind of make friends with the idea of silly.
Hmm.
That a lot of what we do is silly, but that doesn't mean that it's wrong. It doesn't mean that it's ineffectual. It means that it confronts the ego. We
Hmm.
feel, oh, it's silly because maybe we're a little embarrassed because it threatens the ego, the supremacy of the ego. And that's powerful. If it is threatening the ego and you feel ridiculous, keep going, move through that feeling. And then we
Hmm.
get to that ecstatic breakthrough, right? And so to me, taking a name like Storm Faerywolf, it does have a silly element to it. Part of it also is like when I'm like 86 years old, I'm going to be delighted that I have a name like Storm Faerywolf.
Hmm.
This old man, this ridiculous old man with this ridiculous name that doesn't seem to match his wrinkled face, and that just delights me. It just delights me.
That's going going back to what you were saying about kind of pushing through the ego trappings that can hold us back. That speaks so much to my own experience, and I think for me, and perhaps for others as well, part of, by the time I had gotten to that point, you know, I had been practicing for nearly 20 years. And I know I was late at embodying a name, but I had spent so much time sort of crafting who I was with my previous name, you know, and what that meant to be me, and undoing a lot of, you know, abuses and difficulties in childhood and early adulthood, to say, who is this person, you know? So for me to put all of that work aside, which was it was an ego thing, because I had identified so much with that personality, even though I never felt attached to the name as a child. I always was like, what were you going to name me before you named me this?
Right.
You know, but I had to put aside everything that I felt I had built, you know, and recognize, you know, just sort of unmake that, you know, to become this next person that I was to be. And that's when I really stepped into my spiritual work publicly, you know, and teaching and all of those sorts of things. That's when things shifted in a major way for me. You know, this person was someone else. So I had trouble letting go of that, you know? But witchcraft is like that, you know, it's constant being unmade and remade over and over, over and over.
Yeah.
And I think that was my first experience with it on that level. So again, it goes back to that sort of fear of letting go, fear of accepting your power, fear of becoming, you know, unknown. What's next, you know? So that's what I love about this book so much,
Thank
is
you.
it's so focused on, you know, it's not a baby name book. Okay. It's
Right.
like, it's about distilling like the essence of who you are and what your gift is to the world right now in this moment, spiritually speaking, and defining that and putting a label on that. So thank you also. But like,
My
there's so many
pleasure. Thank you.
exercises and rituals to help you process, and you're gonna, like, at the end of this book, you're not only gonna come away with your, you know, a true name for yourself, but you're gonna have an understanding of who you are, you know. It's
I
Talk
hope
to me about
so.
this.
I hope so. You know, most of the work that I do is really steeped in the practical. You know, I mean, I might get poetic, or what I would think is poetic.
You do,
You know,
you
but
do.
thank you. You know, but ultimately, I want my work to be useful. You know, and so and you're right. This isn't just a book of like witchy baby names. You know, that was something very clear from when I pitched this book to Llewellyn. I wanted to be very clear. This is not just a book of names. This is not a name dictionary. There's a teeny bit of that in there where I've got certain names at different times. Like, here's some things from mythology, or here's some things from the animal world, or the, you know, whatever. But it was more just to inspire people. Like, oh, have you considered this area? And here's some names that you might not have considered that come from this or are related, you know, to this idea or this mythos or this concept. But really, it's about creating the magical persona and recognizing, well, what is in me already that I admire, you know, that I want to put more emphasis on, or what types of qualities do I wish that I possessed? You know, what do I want to aspire to? You know, and then I'm going to bring in elements of those, you know, into my name, you know, somehow. So I often kind of would think of this whole process as kind of like weaving, you know, where we're
Yes.
taking these different threads, like, oh, here's this element over here from this particular mythos that I feel aligned with, and I'm going to take that in, and I'm going to bring over this plant element, because maybe you work with plants, and, you know, the plant spirits are very important to you, and this particular plant or this herb is associated in folklore with this quality that aligns with your magical persona, or what you want to be, you know, as your best witch self, right? And then you're going to pull that in and weave that in. Maybe there's this other element over here, and maybe now we'll tweak the spelling, and we're going to look at the astrology and now the numerology and kind of like, kind of craft it, a little bit. And that's why I called it, crafting identities of magical power, because it's not just, oh, I'm going to pick this name and then, oh, it's over and done. No, this is work.
It is
we
work.
are going to bring this together, and I'm going to put it here, and oh, maybe that doesn't fit right, and now we're going to try it this way, and so I wanted the book to reflect that it's not just a one and done thing. It could be something that you come back to later. Like in my instance, I was Storm Wolf for at least several years. And then the fairy came into it, and everybody knows me now as Storm Faerywolf. But yeah, that wasn't always it. And I've had some other magical names. I have actively now have other magical names, of course, because I have been initiated into several different witchcraft traditions, and it is customary to have an initiatory name in certain traditions. And so I have different initiatory names. So if I'm in a circle with those initiates, that's how I would be referred to, not as Storm. So and I also have a magical name that no other humans know and have never heard. That's just between me and my spirits, and they all have a different place, but they're all a tool. Every name that we use for ourselves is a tool. It's a magical tool, just like we might have a set of magical robes, or a particular necklace that we put on every time we're stepping into that magic circle or going to the crossroads or whatever, our meeting places are. And when we do that, when we don those robes or we put on that jewelry, it shifts our consciousness. We enter into that state of being in which we're aligned, and we now are better able to touch our own power. It's not the consciousness of the everyday. It shifts us into that space where we can better touch the numinous. And that's really the power of the magical name. It is such a focal point of our consciousness and allows us to shift into that magical state of enchantment, that I really wanted to share the good news, with people, about it, because it really can be such a powerful tool and practice in our magical toolkit. And yet I've watched a lot of people really denigrate the process, or the whole concept. Oh, well, Wiccans have such terrible names, and it's easy to scoff, because again, we're coming from that ego-driven capitalist mindset. And, a lot of it is, there's also racism involved in that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of times I would hear from people, not just about my name, but like other names, not even magical names, just names that don't sound European, right? Or AKA white. If names sound too black, then some people are not happy with that, right? And so I touch on that in the book, Also, names that sound too feminine sometimes are also not given the respect that they deserve. And so I mentioned a study called the Portia hypothesis, in which it was found that women in the legal field, if their names sounded more traditionally masculine, then they were more likely to succeed in their field. But if their names sounded more traditionally feminine, they were more often glanced over, for promotions and things like that. So there are a lot of unconscious biases, a lot of conscious ones too, but in terms of the name and how they sound, and if it doesn't fit, with, American capitalist society, then a lot of people find it a suspect. But for me, being a public warlock, that's a point of power. The fact that it does not fit with the normal paradigm is an act of power in and of itself. People hear it and it just doesn't live up to their expectation, right? If they think, oh, I'm going to hear from a powerful warlock, and then they hear Storm Faerywolf, they're like, it just sounds like he's like a My Little Pony bro, or, he's watching too much Care Bears, or, whatever, people don't know how to pin it down. And so they can try to like make fun of it, but really that's also a type of fear. It's kind of betraying their own fear, with it. So even a name that maybe to some ears will sound ridiculous, this is a point of power. It also gets my foot in the door.
I think people who feel like having the word fairy in your name is diminishing in some way have probably never worked with the Fae at all, because I don't see your name that way. But I can see how people would. It's interesting. I'm glad you brought that up in the book about names that don't sound white European male names, because I have seen that in my previous professional life literally happen. And so when I have children, so when it came time to name them, those are some things I thought about, because my kids have weird names. My daughter's name is Nimue, which nobody can spell or pronounce. And I was like, she's never going to get a job. So I had to make that the middle name. And then her first name is a very, white European. Her first name is Eleanor. So they're going to be able to read that. They're going to get, and she can just use the initial if she needs to. But that's something I thought about. I was like, she's never going to have a professional life, depending on what she wants to do with this name, which is her name. So it is something that you think about as a parent, and it's sad. It's like deeply saddening, because why is our society in this place still, humans? But yeah, that's a real thing. And there are people who completely will deny, that no, if you have a black sounding name, or, a Spanish sounding name, or any other thing that is slightly difficult to pronounce, like if it's beyond Jake or William, you're done.
Right.
And it's tragic. It's tragic. But I've seen that personally. So that's upsetting. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned that, though, because it is important for people to be aware of that.
Thank you.
So let's talk about your book that's coming out next month, or from when this airs, it'll be probably already out. It's coming out in May, right?
May 8.
Okay, I don't have an advanced copy of this one, so tell me all about it, because I'm excited.
Thank you. So that is The Satyrs Kiss, Queer Men, Sex Magic, and Modern Witchcraft. And this was actually, to be honest, this was the first book that I ever wanted to write.
Oh, wow.
So this is going back, maybe when I was 14, to be honest with you. I wanted to write this book in some form. I'm really glad I didn't, because there would have been no way that I could have done any of it justice. Because it is a book also on sex magic, right? It's right there in the title. I wanted to make sure that no one was shocked. It's right there in the title. But there really wasn't anything that I found that was on practical sex magic for queer men. And I would have thought there would have been. I mean, I did find a couple things. One thing in particular purported to be that, but it didn't really pay off. It didn't actually give anything in terms of a practical working. It didn't really explain that. It also, giving them the benefit of the doubt, I'm going to say it was written a long time ago, and it actually had some ideas in there that were a little offensive to me, like the erasure of bisexuality, and kind of like it didn't sound very trans friendly either.
Yeah,
and
that's
so I
not
wasn't
cool.
really happy with that. And so I wanted, it was weird, because I knew that I could really only, I couldn't write a book on like queer sex magic for everybody.
Sure.
Right? Because I'm not everybody. I haven't had everybody's life experience. I don't know what lesbian sex magic would be like. I don't know what a specifically trans male or trans female sex magic might look like, because that's not something that I have lived. That's not my experience. So I also didn't want to presume to speak for other people in other communities. I'm not even going to speak for the white cis gay male community, because we're not a monolith. No group is a monolith. But I'm especially not going to try to talk about somebody's group that I'm not even a part of, right? So I did want to really keep it focused mostly on gay men, but also kind of expanding it out a little bit, right? So I wanted to talk about, bisexual men, because again, bisexuality often gets erased on both ends of the spectrum, which is so frustrating to me.
In particular, I'm bi, so I get that. And I married a man, so I'm invisible.
Right. So it's really easy, exactly, because people will be, oh, well, you're in a heterosexual relationship, therefore you're heterosexual. That does not change who you are. So
Exactly.
you're still a bisexual woman. You're just in a monogamous. Presumably, you didn't say that, but let's just say if it is monogamous,
Hmm.
that's your business.
Hmm.
But let's say you're in a monogamous relationship. That doesn't change your bisexuality. All it
Exactly.
is you've made a choice in this case that I'm going to honor this particular relationship in this
Right.
way.
Yeah, my partner's gender is not a reflection of my orientation, or my
Exactly,
sexuality. And
exactly.
by
Yeah.
men, they, gosh, we have such an issue in our society. We're going to get off topic. We have such a problem in our society in general with men being allowed to express themselves, express their feelings, that's a whole thing. But then you compound that with they're not, fitting into the box that, we try to put them in. And then they don't fit into any of the other boxes either because, so they try. Most of the bi men I know just say they're gay, because so they'll have some semblance of community, and for
Hmm.
bi women, we don't fit in the lesbian community. They don't want us. They,
Right.
generally
Right.
speaking,
Right.
I'm not going to speak for all lesbians. I know some wonderful lesbians out there, but
Right.
in
Totally. I hear you.
general,
Totally.
we're not welcome because we're betraying them because we also enjoy penises. Okay,
Yeah,
fine,
it's so weird to
but
me that
yeah,
like
it's strange.
people will take it personally.
I know, like
I've
I'm
known
tricking them.
I've known gay men who at
Mm-hmm.
some point in their life end up with a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And I will admit that when that's happened a couple times, I've looked at it like, oh, that's surprising because nothing about them and our interactions together had like indicated that that was a possibility. But then once that initial like, oh, is over, it's like, well, whose business is it except theirs?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not like they're a different person, so why can't you still be their friend? Or but I've totally watched people that were like, oh no, I can't. I'm not going to hang out with them anymore because they're not who I thought they were. No,
Yeah,
they're who you thought they were. You just your eyes are just closed. People change. People, and sexuality is fluid,
yeah.
and
And
people try things. And
if they had been bi all along, it's no damn wonder they didn't tell you.
right,
If this is your
exactly.
reaction.
Exactly. So I wanted to make sure bisexuality was at least mentioned. That I put it out there because the thing that really gets me is obviously from my perspective as a gay man. It's mostly been straight people who have been against me, right? Not usually other gay men, although that can happen too. Um, and so when I found out that my bisexual male friends were not given the same level of community, in the queer community that I was enjoying, that really offended me because I thought, oh, gay people, you should know better. I've often felt
Mm-hmm.
that any minority group should
Should know better.
automatically know better, and we should be
Yes.
better prepared to work together to honor our differences, to honor and celebrate our differences instead
Mm-hmm.
of looking at each other suspect, right?
That is how I feel about it. But in practice, they want to belong and they find a place where they belong. And anything outside of that feels like a threat to that. And they
Yeah.
have a wound there. So I get it, but also stop. You know,
Right.
I get it, but stop
I
it.
totally, yeah, totally. I get it, but
Wounding other
stop.
people in the
Yeah.
same way doesn't relieve you of
And it's
your,
so,
you
it's
know,
so, I don't know. I just want to say that's so last century.
it so
You
is.
know?
I agree. But and also, trans men, they have a different experience, bodily
Mhm.
that needs attention as well, So,
Absolutely. And so that was something I definitely brought up too. I wanted to make sure that people knew that even though this was a book on practical sex magic, right? And
mhm,
so I talk about some pretty specific things. I there's the practical work, for sex magic, is a little, I don't know. It's fun. It's probably the best homework that ever gets assigned, right?
yes,
And
yes, those are
you
always
know,
my favorites.
I have exercises for individuals, but also for couples and groups, right? Because I
Mhm,
wanted to really put forward the idea that, like, this is not just about sanctioning one particular type of sexual activity.
mhm,
We've played that out, right? Christianity and the monotheist religions have played that out. sex is only acceptable if it's between a man and a woman in the missionary position in order to make a child, blah, 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 blah. If you're enjoying it, you're doing it wrong. And so, and part of this book was to say, this should be fun. Sex magic should feel good. Sex magic should be hot. You should have a wonderful, sexy experience because sex is wonderful. If it's between consenting adults, then it's beautiful. And to me, that's the requirement, have full informed consent, which incidentally, in my mind, precludes sexual relationships between people like teachers and students. I definitely am on record. I do not believe that teachers of any stripe, but especially in the craft, I do not think that teachers should be having sex with their students. And that seems like a no-brainer.
It does, but it doesn't. What I mean? Because there's a power dynamic there. People can't give consent in the same way.
If I'm a student and I'm training in a tradition, which I was, training in a tradition. And, if my teacher had then required, me to have sex with them, that is a dilemma, to some degree, though, even if my teacher had offered that, because, again, I was trained in a few different traditions, but most notably in the fairy tradition of witchcraft. And in our tradition, there is a legitimate way of passing our initiation through sexual intercourse. And this was something that was often done between lovers, pre-existing lovers. You could share the tradition with your lover in this way. But some people have looked at that and said, oh, that's the only way that it can be passed, which the founders said that's not true. In fact, Cora Anderson, in her book, 50 Years in the Fairy Tradition, talks explicitly about a non-sexual intercourse way of passing the initiation that we call right by intentions of the heart. And but still, some people were like, no, this is the only way it can be done. And it was a way of perpetuating abuse. And so I've been very clear that, when I take on new in-person students, if I'm training them in fairy, I will tell them, like our first meeting, I will not be having sex with you, because some people expect that. I've had people expect that. I've had people say that, like, oh, well, I'd love to train in fairy, but I'm not comfortable with having to have sex with my teacher. And I'm like, well, that's good, because I'm not comfortable having sex with my students. Yeah. That's not going to happen. In fact, I think if anybody does that, that's cultic rape. And so I definitely want to make sure I'm on record, because there are people in my tradition, in the fairy tradition, in other traditions, that do practice this type of sexuality in the craft. And I'd say it's non-consensual, and so it is cultic rape. If you are going to be involved in sex magic, everyone should be on the same page. It shouldn't be like, oh, this person's an initiate and they're teaching us. Well, no, that's not okay. Because again, there's that power dynamic that we just talked about. And even the student, they're an adult, presumably, right?
They better be.
But they better be an adult.
Yeah.
And but even being an adult doesn't mean that you're capable of giving full consent.
Yeah.
Because of that power dynamic. And so, and I'm still amazed there's people out there that are just championing their right to do this. And what they're doing is they're leaving broken people in their wake.
Yeah. And there's and students do project on you. They project their stuff on you. So yeah, it's not at all uncommon during the process of just training that a student kind of crushes on you or falls head over heels for you or loses their goddamn mind over you. That's part of the process. They grow through that, they're projecting stuff because you're safe. And when you become unsafe, and when you become unsafe, that's a fucking problem, That's a problem. So, and it's hard, because, you have to find your peers. You have to find your peers among other teachers, other traditions, people on your level, But yes, consent, exuberant, constant consent.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
Yes.
I like that exuberant. If it's not an exuberant yes, then that's a no.
That's a no. That's a no, baby. Okay, write that down. Yay. I cannot wait to read this book. I know it's not, necessarily written for me, but I'm pretty sure I'll be able to read it and be like, I'm going to take notes here. And
yes. I'm very hopeful. I've been hearing that, especially from a lot of women, and which is really. I'm humbled and I'm intrigued and I am excited and I'm nervous because again the target audience is queer men, but I have always been hopeful that people outside of that particular bubble, will also be able to get something out of it, and I think that everybody can in the same way that me as a cis white gay man have been able to get things out of stories and things that were not intended for me. Like every freaking rom-com I've ever seen is
Right.
not geared towards me. It's geared
It's not
towards...
good advice either, generally speaking.
Well, that's true. Yeah, exactly. But in terms of like watching the story and like being affected and like, oh, I see they're in love and oh, but they're having trouble and oh, but I hope they get together. It's kind of like these kind of common tropes, these common themes, but I know it's not geared towards me specifically, but I can still feel those things. I can still have empathy for the characters, because I see humans on the screen that are dealing with human emotions. And so I just am able to simply make that inner translation and I can feel what I need to feel from it. And so I'm hopeful that other people, non-queer people, or even other queer people who are not part of the little bubble, that I was focusing it on, I'm hopeful that all of them will be able to get something out of it too, simply by making those inner translations that I've had to do my entire life.
Yeah, I was
so I think it's a helpful exercise in that way as well.
Yeah, there's not always material out there, so it's a constant practice of how can I make this work for me? How can I be inspired by what I'm seeing here and translate that into my own experience? So yeah, I don't think that's going to be a problem. But I'm very excited.
And the one thing that I wanted to say before I forget is going back to the thing with trans people and bodies. I definitely put something in there, a little note about bodies, saying that, yes, this is sex magic. And I might be talking about things like the penis and the testicles, right? Because that plays a role. However, we should be aware that a penis and testicles are not the be all end all of being male. And so we might need to make adjustments, to accommodate for our own bodies or the bodies of our partners, and so I really encourage the reader to make those adjustments, so if you are a trans man and, regardless of what surgeries you may have had or didn't have, you're a man. Trans men are men, full stop. And so I wanted this work to be available for them as well. So I'm hopeful, even though I'm not trans and I can't speak to that experience, I'm hopeful that I have been inclusive enough to allow people to feel that they can get something out of this work as well.
Wonderful. And I'm excited to, and that would work well potentially for trans women as well that have different body parts and people in relationship with all sorts of different people. I can't wait. From the way you've described it and the way I've heard you talk about it in other interviews as well, I'm very excited for it to come out. And I think this is up the alley of my audience. We're pretty queer here at the Crossroads. So nice. I hope that they all buy your books and that they're wonderful.
Thank you.
What's your, okay, I'm going to ask the last question. It's my favorite question for people. What is the big project for you? It doesn't have to be something that you're already working on. It could be way in the distant future. It could just be a total pipe dream. What is the thing that you want to put out into the world?
Oh gosh. My thing is a little teeny question, almost nothing. My thing is I like to have my fingers in a lot of different projects. I'm a Pisces with a Gemini moon.
Oh, bless.
And an Aries rising, which sometimes saves me, but sometimes doesn't. But, I think the big thing is just really wanting to expand our Modern Witch University. And you can check it out at modernwitchuniversity.com. But that's where we have it's all of our online classes, including the Black Rose Witchcraft course, which is a roughly year-long online course. We are thinking about adding some other classes. We have a secondary level, another level to Black Rose that we are working on. We've been working on it for a while, so hopefully we'll get some headway there soon. I do have a couple other like book projects in my mind right now that I'm not going to pitch yet until I've gotten some more, on there. I've got some products, a product line that hopefully is going to be coming out soon. I have a line of bath and magical body products that I'm working
Ooh,
on
that's
with one of my
exciting.
partners. Yeah, so in the Dandy Warlock line, so I'm very excited about that as well. So it's a lot of, it's not any one big thing. It's a lot of little things, more books, more classes. Hopefully some more art will be coming down the tube, a little bit soon. I just got my website revamped. Thank you, Devin Hunter.
Oh,
And
he's
so,
fantastic at that.
oh,
I'm
he's
always
so
like,
good at it.
don't
He's
compare
so good
your
at it.
don't compare your website to anything that Devin does, because you'll be
Right.
disappointed.
Yeah, he got me all set up. My website had not been updated in years. It was terrible. It was embarrassing. And then I had these books coming out. And I'm like, oh my God. So he kind of revamped it and gave me a basic template. And then I went in and kind of like, made it my own and whatever. And I'm really happy with it now. So I'm hoping your listeners will check it out. That's at faerywolf.com, FAERYWOLF.com, faerywolf.com. And
Awesome.
from there, you can see my books, my art, my poetry, my blog, where I have a lot of different articles on the craft and fairy tradition and queer spirit, all of that. My website's been up there since 1999. So
Ooh.
it's had some time. Got
a link from Witchbox to it. It's great.
Oh my God. I'm still sad that Witchbox is gone, even though it was such a convoluted website, wasn't it?
It was, but I loved
it.
I loved it. And gosh, I felt the same way when we lost all of our GeoCities and all of those little spaces. That's how we found each other back in the day. Or you stand in the bookstore in that one aisle and you just wait for somebody else to come look at books on that same space.
Oh my goodness. I remember
we don't even
those
have
days.
Bookstores anymore. We have
we hardly have bookstores anymore. I
don't know how people find each other. Oh, the internet.
We had a store. We owned a store, for several years.
The
store had been there for like over 30 years. We had owned it for like 13. I'd worked there as a manager for years prior. But we did close it during COVID. So in 2020, we had to close the doors. And it actually was the best decision we ever made. A little melancholy. It was nice to have a beautiful space to go and to actually meet people and whatever. But I'm a bit of a hermit now. That's what the pandemic did for me. And the pandemic, the lockdown, I wrote 2 books and I became a hermit. So.
I did not write any books, but I too became a hermit. And now I'm just starting to kind of get back into, I was still teaching, but online, which is different. And I don't know how I feel about it. I like some things about it. Like I don't have to wear pants. But the other parts are difficult. It's difficult to teach witchcraft when you're not there. But anyway, we made it work.
It's interesting because I feel like it was just perfect for me. Like I hate to say it because the pandemic, I have a lot of empathy. For a lot of people, it's been very stressful. Yeah. It was a really good thing for me personally. Yeah. I was able to get a lot done in the house. Our business is doing better than it's ever done. I was able to write these 2 books. But it kind of made me a hermit, right? Because I hardly ever leave the house, like hardly even to go grocery shopping, so here I am. And I feel like, in its own way, the pandemic has enabled me to manifest my lifelong dream of being a very stylish shut-in, so here we are, but.
No, but that's true. Because for me, I felt a lot of like, I got to run around. I got to do this. I got to do that. I got to do that. And I was becoming crazy,
Yeah.
And so easy. Just being at home and not having to do all the things was wonderful. But now I don't want to leave ever. So it just like dragging myself to Sabbath.
That's a thing. But I was just before this all happened too. I didn't have really any in-person students anymore.
Oh, okay.
And so I had been teaching over Skype. And then, of course, when the pandemic happened, everyone switched to Zoom, and everything. So I was doing Zoom. There's all these other things, we're on Zencaster today. Yeah. But I'm learning all the new things, but I was already doing that. And so when everybody was like, oh my God, what are we going to do? How are we going to teach these classes? Whatever, because they had all been in person only. And in fact, a lot of those people had asserted that, you couldn't possibly effectively teach witchcraft, long distance. And I was like, no, I actually have been doing it for years, effectively. For years. And it's not just like, you're going to download this stuff and then,
Mm-hmm.
check in on it. No, I'm having live one-on-one sessions with people. I'm leading trance. We're talking about it. They check in every week. It's a
Mm-hmm.
thing. And
Yep.
I realized at some point that, it's not about a physical space. It's about a
Mm-hmm.
space in our mind, that
Mm-hmm.
shared energetic space. If I believe in magic and that
Uh-huh.
my magic can affect the world outside of my physical space,
Mm-hmm.
then why would I have a problem purporting to teach or to be taught, over these long distance mediums? As long as we are creating that space of mind and we're
Mm-hmm.
able to communicate on that level, then the other stuff you can work out.
Absolutely.
We can make adjustments, but it's all about being creative and figuring
Mm-hmm.
it out. And that was something I learned years ago. I was invited to attend a teleconference ritual, like on the phone, you
Oh,
know,
nice.
um, and I thought at the time, I was like, oh, that seems ridiculous. Of course I'll do it. Right. And I didn't tell them that because I wasn't a total jerk, but
Yeah.
internally I was, because I was just like, oh, how ridiculous. Right. And then we did it and I was like, oh, that worked.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like, it dawned on me. I was like, oh my God, of course it worked.
Of course,
Right.
all the things that we teach, space and time is not an issue.
Right.
I think, and I learned, like, I'm studied with the Temple of Witchcraft. So I'm in Mississippi.
Nice.
So obviously all of my, 5 years of mystery school was online, and
Yeah.
we would meet and talk and different things. So I know this can be done. I know it can work. For me, I teach in person. So my students have a different perspective of it. And I think
Mhm.
the only things that I have found to be difficult, not insurmountable, not impossible, is just when you're working with absolute beginners and they haven't had an opportunity to really feel energy yet, or put their recognize what they're feeling.
Mhm.
It's very helpful to be in person with them, so you can feel it and you can put things out that's easy for them to pick up. And they do have a harder time online, but it's not impossible. You can absolutely talk them through it, and you do get to that moment where they're like, which is what I live for. I live for that face.
Yeah.
For all my
Totally.
students, if you want to impress me, just look surprised occasionally and I'll be happy. But yeah, but it's absolutely can be done. And then for my students that I had been working with for, a time, um, there was no difference. We were able to click in with each other and do that work, and I didn't have to wear pants. It was great. It's been great
Right. There
for
you go.
that. For
Absolutely.
that. But I do
Yeah.
I
Agreed.
feel like some of those students that started during the pandemic, I feel like maybe I could have given them more. They missed something, and they probably didn't. They're probably fine. But, that's my brain. That's
Well, I
me.
mean, it's a learning curve for all of us, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it definitely, not everybody um, had a bunch of experience, teaching
Mhm.
long distance,
Yeah.
before the pandemic. I noticed that at least a good chunk of the people that had for years, been critical of my decision to teach long distance and saying that it couldn't be done, suddenly they were
They're
quietly
calling
doing it
you, right?
themselves. No,
Oh.
no one's actually gonna, no, none of them are actually going to call me.
And ask for advice.
No, 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 no,
Oh
no.
no.
I'm persona non grata, in
Ah.
those circles, and that's fine by me. But suddenly they started doing it, and I was like,
Mhm.
aren't these the people that said that
Can't
was
be done.
anathema? It can't be done,
Uh-huh.
And now they're just quietly doing it. Don't get me started on the accusations of like, oh, charging money for your classes, because
Mm-hmm.
of course I charge money for my time, and a
As you
lot of these
should.
people were saying, oh, you can't do that, and blah blah blah, and some of those people now I've noticed are also charging money
It's
quietly
like they
for their
have electric
classes. Like,
bills or something, like the rest of us.
I see
I
how
get
that
that a
goes.
lot. Yeah, the temple, we pay our clergy and we pay our teachers, and we encourage people to charge for their services because it's a lot of
Yeah.
damn work.
Well, and
But
also what
to
I found with that is that, and don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's plenty of people who don't charge who are great, but a lot of times when people weren't charging, they actually were charging. It just wasn't money, and
Mm,
and what they were expecting in terms of compensation, it wasn't upfront. And so
mm,
you didn't really know what you were getting yourself into. And so often, if you weren't paying for your training, with cash or whatever, you were paying for it in another way. And sometimes you were paying for it with, a bit of your mind. You were entering into a cult.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And yeah, I've totally seen that. I've seen people totally like have to swear oaths to, to kind of take care of their teachers, their initiators, whatever. I'm like, what's going on here? That's fucked up. So with me, it's like, nope, here's your monthly fee. That's what I expect from you. Here's the behavior. It's in my FAQ. It's very clear what the boundaries are. And here, let's go. And if you agree to those conditions, then we can do this, whatever. And I also will, I'll work with people if there's problems financially. We can work on that. I've offered work trade, that kind of stuff, community service type stuff. So I'll work that out with people if people are willing to do the work. But I definitely do need to get compensated for my time, because this is literally how I make my living. None of us living here, we collectively call ourselves house warlocks. There's 4 of us. Yeah. And none of us have a regular job. All of us are authors, teachers, artists. This is how we make our living full time. So if I wasn't charging for my time, I literally could not do this work. And so, and this is my calling. So this is what I want to do. So if that's okay with you, then come along. You can, come to my website, read about what I do. If you want to get involved with that. If not, if that's not your cup of tea, then that's fine too. I put a lot of free stuff out there on the websites. I'm hoping that people will be able to get what they need, out of that. No harm, no foul. But yeah, there you go.
Yeah, no, I always find it hilarious when people think, and this is probably the same for authors as well, but they think people who teach witchcraft or lead witchcraft communities have all this money. And I'm just like, where? They, like, as if we're a Baptist church. Where is it?
Right.
I don't know where it is. But yeah, no. But yeah, so I think absolutely people should charge for their work and be compensated for their time, which is so valuable. But anyway, speaking of time, thank you so much, Storm, for being here. It's been absolutely wonderful talking to you, and I do hope that you will come back again one day. We will have all the links to your website and to everything you've got going on in the show notes. I'm so bad with YouTube. Look, I'm learning. I'm not from this generation. I don't know what I'm doing. Okay. But yeah,
None
so
of
we'll
us
put links
do.
in the show notes. Subscribe, click, ring the bell, whatever you're supposed to do all that stuff. And check out Storm. You've got a lot of stuff out there for people to enjoy. I've read your poetry. Dreamy, beautiful. Keep doing it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. So that's our show. And thank you all for listening. And we'll see you next time. Blessed be, everyone.
Blessed be.
Thank you all so much for listening, and don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe through your favorite podcast provider. It helps us get our podcast in front of more listeners just like you. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can leave us a voicemail by clicking the link in the description of this episode, and you can always find us on Facebook and Instagram by searching for Crossroads and Cauldrons Podcast.